Okay. So I'm actually standing in for a colleague of mine who's feeling a little bit under the weather. So this is a short presentation, which the intent is to talk a little bit about the consumption of analytics. I think there's a tremendous amount of focus today on the creation of it, the data, the techniques, the technology, and so on. But there is a tremendous opportunity to gain advantage within organizations by focusing on helping people consume analytics better. I'd like to start with an example. So I used to be in sales for Mu Sigma until about 3 weeks back. I got, I moved to a different role. So as part of that transition, I still sort of take a few sales calls with customers and so on. And so I was talking to a telecom service provider recently, who was talking to us about building an analytical capability within an organization, which is something that we help our clients do. We actually see ourselves as a company that helps you build a better art for problem solving. So as part of this, one example that came by is, I asked this person, so what is the level of application of analytics within your organization? So he said, well, we have the usual reports. We've got MicroStrategy, and we've got reports going off of our customer data and usage data. So yeah, there's a little bit of it. We even got a little bit of predictive modeling in there. In fact, we commissioned someone to build a model to predict the likelihood of customers leaving or customer churn. And we got that model, and yeah, it works. So so I asked him, so do you guys use that? It's it's a very good first step in customer relationship management. If you can prevent them from going, perhaps they can do a lot more for you. So and then he said something interesting, which was actually we just sort of turn the switch every so often. We just come up with a list of customers that are likely to leave, but we don't do anything with it. So I said, that's a bit strange. It's useful information. Right now, your marketing is completely untargeted, meaning you're out there reaching out to customers, trying to get them to subscribe to your service. But here's a customer that's already subscribed, and you potentially have an opportunity to prevent them from leaving. Bird in hand, two in the bush, that comparison. So why wouldn't you do it? And the answer he gave me was, well, the business doesn't understand the model. So what do you mean by that? Well, the company that built this for us built a nice little engine, gave it to us, and every so often we click a button with updated data, and it gives us a list with a score. So we tried giving it to the business. They looked at it a couple of times, and then just ignored it. So believe it or not, this is the state of analytics in several organizations. In fact, this had something to do with our founder actually starting our company, in that this is not just true about analytics, even consulting engagements. Companies that commission expensive consultants come, do a study. Sometimes the presentations just sit on a shelf collecting dust. And the reason for that is the fact that there's a tremendous amount of rigor in solving a certain problem, but there isn't much thinking put into, okay, now how do I take this answer and use it? So, for example, if you look at the creation and consumption cycle, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations within companies, a lot of people, a lot of analysts do a fantastic job of generating analytics. I can build you a machine learning model that will predict whether or not a customer would leave. or I can build you a machine learning model or a statistical model that will tell you that if a person purchases something on a website, they're very likely to purchase A, B, and C. All of those are great, but how do you make sure that people adopt that? There's a little bit of understanding systems, understanding the organization structure, understanding politics, understanding human behavior, if you will, that comes into play. So let me take the example that I just mentioned here. The organization that actually built the model did a fantastic job of that, but really did not do anything in the consumption cycle, right? Communicating the insight. How did I get the answer? So one of the things that they did was actually built a black box tool, meaning there was an engine inside. Nobody really knew what it did, but it just gave out a list of customers. Well, if you don't know why someone's on that list, you don't know what kind of intervention you can take with that customer, right? Maybe the customer got on that list because they had a unsatisfactory conversation with customer service, or maybe they got on the list because they're using less of your service or product. Without knowing this, my intervention cannot be optimized. So it's useful to understand the operational elements of consumption. So the point that we're trying to make, and actually this is sort of bridging the gap between analytics and decision sciences, or decision support, more importantly. Ultimately, the value of what we do for a living with technology, data, analytics is seen only when the answer is used somewhere. So as a result, it actually becomes to some extent the job of an analyst to sort of put on the hat of a salesperson, if you will, to say, hey, this is the answer, but you need to use this. This is why I think it's of value. Not just stop there, but to go on and say, here's how I would use this. There are other biases that might exist as well. So a lot of times in the process of driving consumption, let me take another example. A lot of times people expect exact answers from data. And exact in the sense, I mean, I'm sure for those non-statisticians out here, the notion of 95% confidence is something you would have heard several times. No one, not many people actually, not many lay people or decision makers or business people actually question that. Why do I need 95% confidence? Are there circumstances where 50% confidence is good enough? So the example I want to give you is something where we were actually playing around with a project for our client. It was mostly a research project where we said this is for a pharmaceutical company. Much of our innovative ideas is actually looking at ideas that bear fruit in one industry and sort of move it to another industry and say, can I use it there? So this was for a pharmaceutical company who was interested in trying to see, is there any way I can predict the behavior of physicians when they will start to change their prescribing behavior? Why is that important? Because if the gentleman or lady is prescribing my drug and they made a habit of it, and then all of a sudden if they're going to change, that means lower business for me. Purely commercial mindset, of course. But is it worthwhile for me to identify a customer who's at the state of change, if you will? So it's the same as the customer churn problem in telecom. The only problem with life sciences is that when we actually used all the data we could get our hands on, we built a model which had 50% accuracy. That's the best we could do. And the 50% accuracy meant that if the model told you that there are 10 doctors who are at risk of switching their behavior or changing their behavior. In reality, only 5 would. Logic tells you that this is not exactly a good model. I agree, it's not. But is it useful? That's the question. So when we actually shared this with our customers, there were actually 2 types of customers for us. There's the insights team of our customer organization, and then there's the group that actually uses this, that's the sales organization. So when we talked to our insights clients, the first reaction was, you guys spent 3 months on this and came up with a model with 50% accuracy, and you want us to use this? And we said, well, this was a research project. We tried to get our hands on as much data as we could, potentially cover as many factors that could drive the change in behavior, but this is the best we could do. But we still think this is useful. So, okay, why is it useful? The trick is to look at the trade-off, right? So if I didn't know this information, I'm not going to do anything. Chances are, out of these 10 customers, 5 customers that are going to leave are going to leave. Whereas if I act on the model and say I create an intervention or have my salespeople talk to all 10 people, then I have a chance of saving those 5. And you have to trade off the effort of calling on 10 people versus the benefit of saving 5, right? And as most of you probably know, pharmaceutical companies, the margins are pretty high. So if you save, a little bit of business, it actually translates to a lot of money. So even with an inaccurate model, it's worthwhile. So this kind of conversation, so it actually, in all honesty, it actually took us 3 or 4 months to have these conversations with different people in the organization before we could get them to say, you know what, I'd like to see this as part of my monthly report that I send out to my sales folks. So they will know which doctors to focus on for that month. And we eventually managed to do that. But the reason we were able to ensure that the idea did not go to waste, even if it wasn't perfect, was the fact that we focused on consumption, removing the potential barriers that exist to consumption, or helping our customers overcome those barriers. And that's absolutely essential if you want to sort of make sure that analytics gets consumed in practice. So this is the last slide. So the context within within each organization is a little bit different, and consequently the way you tailor that message has to be a little different. So if you look at organizations and how they're distributed in terms of the maturity, analytical maturity of the industry, and the analytical savvy of the organization. You probably, I'm sure most of you are used to quadrants, so there are probably 4 different types of companies out there. There are companies whose industry is sort of, does not believe or practice analytics. And then, of course, the analytical savvy of the organization is very low. The message needs to be couched in the fact that there are some pure operational benefits that you can demonstrate and create by following the practice of analytics. So something as simple as, hey, if you do this, you can cut waste by 10%. So those kind of conversations are fairly useful in those circumstances. In situations where you have a mature industry but a specific company that's behind the curve in terms of analytical savvy, you need to communicate the message that analytics as a practice is a differentiator, and how analytics has helped the rest of the industry become more efficient or help companies turn around. and sort of treat this as a wake-up call. This notion, of course, applies not just for companies, but also for organizations within companies. On the other side, where you have the analytical savvy of the organization being pretty high versus, while the maturity of the industry is low, it's useful to talk about, continue to sort of push the envelope and not sit on, sort of the fact that, hey, you know what, I am leading the industry in this. It's useful to sort of play out future scenarios where analytics can play a role in areas that they hadn't thought of, so that you can continue to push the envelope. The challenge with these sort of companies is that complacency tends to set in after a while, saying, oh, you know what, analytics plays a role in most of my operations. Well, if you're not looking at new problems to solve, you're probably not going to get the benefit of analytics as a habit or a muscle. Analytics needs to be a muscle within an organization. Analytics is not a set of solutions. It is more a habit, it's a practice, it's a muscle. So that message needs to get communicated. And of course, the same thing applies to leaders as well. Communicate the importance of analytics to sustained competitive advantage. At the end of the day, one of the things that we believe as an organization, we actually believe that the creation of analytics is likely to get industrialized, and with the combination of technology, data, techniques, math, all the discovery that we're seeing of late in the last 5 to 10 years, we're well on our way to industrialization. You actually see pretty much every e-commerce website today employs fairly rigorous analytics and product recommendations and tailoring content and things like that. Industrialization is bound to happen. The differentiator, though, is in how effectively you can consume analytics. And as analysts, as the ecosystem that aims to drive better decision making, it's useful to acknowledge the barriers that exist in consumption. The barriers, simply put, can be behavioral, bias, operational, systems related. One of the challenges we've seen actually with the bank is that we provided them a solution that helped them effectively identify customers for cross-selling. The challenge was the bank was actually an amalgamation of 2 different banks, which one acquired the other, and they were running on separate systems. And the product portfolios were separate. So an advisor from the old bank could not offer a product from the new bank, and vice versa. So with that sort of operational problem in place, you go and suggest a cross-sell solution saying, here you go, this is the answer. It may not work. You'd actually have to live through the implementation of the solution so that they can actually see the benefit. So that's actually the message. Do not lose sight of consumption.